Welcome to Vox Pop. This is episode 2, and today we're going to be talking to David, aka Zero to Hero, on Twitter. David and I got talking to each other as you do, and he very kindly decided that he'd lend me some of his time to explore some of his views on the lockdown and the way that the world is going generally. So without further ado, here's David, Zero to Hero, in episode 2 of Vox Pop. I hope you enjoy it. Well, welcome to Vox Pop, the second episode with another victim who has kindly volunteered to have a chat with me about what's happening in the UK today and the world generally today. David, hello, welcome.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Yeah,
thank you very much for basically coming along and helping me to work my way through this. Trying to combine IT and some sort of interviewing or discussion technique is right at the edge of my comfort zone, so it's you'll have to bear with me. David, first of all, before we start, Paul, who was with me last time, gave me a little bit of a brief understanding of who he was. We did talk earlier about the fact that I'm Mark and you're David, and yet we've both got pseudonyms on Twitter. We've both obviously got surnames, but on Twitter we're both pseudonyms. I know why I do that. What's your reasoning behind that?
Well, I think like a lot of people, it's because what we can and can't say these days is very, very restricted by social mores, which have always been there, but particularly in the current environment, and it's probably been one that's been around for some time. What we can say within the acceptable Overton window is very limited before we start being accused of being bigoted or racist or right-wing or that kind of thing. Yeah. And also work-wise, being an employee within a large corporate, within a corporation, one has to be very careful about what one says, otherwise it can be career ending. And that I'm not talking about saying anything actually that's bigoted or racist or anything along those lines, but just, if you like, normal points of view, normal views of the world, which today are forbidden. So that's why it just enables a freer flow of commentary, more honest debate, I think, without fear or favour. And I think that's healthy.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I mean, a lot of people, especially bigger names and household names, if you like, get very annoyed and frustrated, perhaps even holier than thou, about, you're hiding behind anonymity, which normally they say it to people who are making their lives difficult or being rude to them, which is fair enough. But
yes,
but I don't think. I think most of them probably get it. But the other thing is, there's an awful lot of us out there that have something to lose, but they feel that we can't say even the mildest. It's not even like it's outlandish or on the edges of the Overton window. Well, the Overton window has moved clearly, but it's that things that were true until the day before yesterday are suddenly hate speech, quite literally, which is bizarre.
That's right. Yes, we can state something that's scientific and always known, whether it be the idea of the way viruses work, or about male and female genders. And today, you could lose your job over it. Stating scientific facts. Now that, as we know, is a whole subject in its own right, and something that we should be deeply worried about. And I know everyone I communicate with and who follow me, and I follow them on Twitter, share that deep concern about where we are now and where we're headed.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, my late father died about 6 years ago, and so 2015, in fact, about this time. And I was aware that things were going wrong, even then. I mean, it's been happening a long time, but the way it's accelerated over the last 5 years, I don't think you would recognise the world that we now live in if you came back, to be honest, which I find incredible in 5 or 6 years. That could be the case.
I know, it's extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. And I think Twitter and Facebook has got a lot to do with that, because if one looks at the graph, the statistics of when certain ideas became started to dominate conversation, like transgenderism, they took off all of a sudden, and it was largely because of social media conversation and if you like, I would have thought probably a means of, as we're saying, we want to be able to say what we want to say, so do the left, and that's absolutely fine. The problem is that what's acceptable debate has moved in that direction, rather than those of us who would consider ourselves, if you like, more even centrist, probably, or normal, have normal views about the world and about the way things, the way the world works, and the way people behave, and so on. So, yes, I think there was the two are connected. I think Twitter taking off and some of these ideologies, and strangely, it has meant that shift towards those ideologies which we feel it's rather alien to us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing you have heard of this. I don't know whether you've read it, but do you know of Saul Lelinski's Rules for Radicals?
No, go on.
And he basically has set out a manual for how to win this particular, to win the Overton window. And it's largely based on all of the techniques that you see if you look at people like, I would suggest people like Owen Jones and people like that. It's all about attacking the man. It's all about, or the woman. It's all about appearance, if you like, more than discussion. And it's largely based, and this is about the book, not about anybody in particular, but it's largely based around how you can win at all costs. It's considered by many to be a pretty effective way of doing things, and it's obviously been effective because over the last 30 years or 40 years, I think we've seen the left dominate everything, in the culture and politically, in the media and everywhere. And I wouldn't be.
Yes.
I wouldn't be. It's definitely worth looking at or finding out some more about. But the Rules for Radicals and what's actually happening now, pretty much you can see how it's been used. Well,
it's why. It's why we have to be anonymous, because we know that they attack the person.
Yeah. And
we'll say something fairly normal, and that will be. They will describe that as racist or misogynist or homophobic or something along those lines, and that sticks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think
it's
Sorry, go on.
No, it's just it kind of it goes back to sort of I'm in a revisionist phase of my life more than ever, and I'm because I've turned 60, and so I'm sort of retirement age, and I was born right at the end of the 50s. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, my formative years, and I look back now and realise that a lot of what I was experiencing then was part of this change in society and postmodernism, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And when you look at people like, was it Dutschke, or who's Long March Through the Institutions, that was late 60s. And this was how they were losing the economic argument, but they won the and we can say it now, they won the cultural argument. And that's been continuing throughout my life, and including my education. I can almost mark, if I look back on it, I can almost sort of feel the changes that were going on, but we weren't particularly aware of it at the time. Well, not at all aware, we were just learning. But the edging out of history related to the country, and the, gradually sort of moving on to sort of more abstract ideas about, whether it was in art or whether it was in history, but you could sense, and I can sense now, and then I look at it and observe my son's education, that it's been to use the word progressive, constantly progressive shift in, we'll call it a leftwards direction, but that's the easiest way of putting it. But it's dominated. And so it doesn't matter how many times we vote in the current government isn't conservative, but it doesn't matter how many times we vote in a conservative government, all our main institutions and our ideologies around society, and it may be largely because of our educational institutions, both high school and universities, are very left dominated. And I don't mean traditional left, Labour, I mean Marxist, elitist, progressive, liberal, whatever you want to call them, whatever labels we want to use, we know what we mean. And that's what we've got, is a society in which that ideology dominates.
Yeah, it's pretty depressing. I mean, I think I agree with you. When I'm just slightly younger than you, which is something I say rarely these days, but I'm in my just over mid-50s. So I remember I did my O-levels, I don't know what they're called nowadays, but I did my O-levels at school in, I think, 76, something like that. No, wouldn't have been 76, would it have been a bit later? 1980, something like that.
Okay.
And I studied history, and when I studied history, the O-level syllabus for history that I studied was, I think, turn of the century to basically the 20th century up till the 70s, so including the common market, went right the way up to the common market. And so we covered, you can imagine, the First World War, the Second World War were featured heavily in my, and then also English that I studied as well, of course. English literature, it was all about the war poets, Dulcet Decorum Est and all this sort of stuff. And I look, and also in earlier years, when I was 12, 13, 14, we studied the Tudors and the Civil War. We studied history. And okay, you get taught the history that you're taught. So I was going to say my truth then, but what I've been taught and what I believe to be true was in all the textbooks at the time. And I think the reason it's so dangerous now that they are teaching, that people are coming out without any shame and saying things like, the British Empire is as bad as the German fascist party of the 30s, and Churchill is a racist. And now I've no idea of Churchill. I know that some people say that he was a man of a different 2 centuries ago. He was born 2 centuries ago, so I'm sure he had a different view on race and everything else to what we might have nowadays. But I'm sorry, he spent the entire wealth of the British Empire, which was the biggest empire in the world at the time, defeating Nazism.
Yes.
It's outrageous that he now has his statue regularly attacked. Got attacked again last night, apparently. I just find that stunning. And it's really scary because in the same way that I, as a child, was taught what I was taught by the adults, because apparently that's the truth, we've now got schools, I won't say full because I'm sure there's good and bad, but with lots of very right-on teachers that are
Yeah.
teaching what they were taught, and what is, I don't think, anything like a reasonable portrayal of the reality.
No, quite. It's a remarkable conceit that, and it's always true, I think, of the educated, the young educators. They come out of university, they've got great ideas for, tend to be left-leaning, always have been, but ideas for revolution and change, and making things in their own image rather than what it was in the past. But like everything else, whether it's it seems like everything else that it's become much more radicalized and much more accelerated. So there's an absolute disgust around anything that doesn't accord with the current mores, the current ideology, and so it only takes for one of our most famous scientists or authors, or indeed political figures, to have said something for the times, for what at the times might have been perfectly normal or acceptable, for them to be cancelled. I mean, it's a form of cancelling. It's wanting to get to their year zero, where we start everything afresh in their image. And it's the same conceit, I think, sort of thought processes that generate climate ideology, climate as a religion. I mean, and we know, and there's been lots of talk about it, that lots of these ideologies and reactionary sort of ways of thinking about the world are its replacement for or it's filling a hole that religion used to fill.
Yes.
And for a long time, it was probably material goods as we became much more wealthy certainly through, I'm from quite a relatively poor background. We certainly didn't want for food and clothes and shoes and so on, but we had no spare money at all. But I've been very fortunate in my career, and of course society generally and the world has grown in wealth and prosperity enormously over the last 4 decades. And so those material things probably took precedence for a while. There was still the radical thought, but today it seems that it's because of the wealth that's around, and we know that much of this radicalism comes from very affluent young people who are not wanting for anything materially, and their parents have done really well and they're relatively well off. I mean, I'm generalizing. I mean, of course it's not true everywhere, but that they need something else. And so the ideology is accelerating, the cancel culture, the toppling of statues, whatever it is, however it materializes in society, is really accelerating. And it is, it's appalling for those of us who are probably more conservative leaning. I don't mean that as in the Tory party. I mean, I've not got a good thing to say about the Tory party, but it is for those of us who think that the world needs to learn and build on what's gone before, and that includes, things that weren't so good, as well as the good things. But it is extremely childish. I mean, utterly childish. And I'm not talking about sixth formers, or those who are sort of still at school and still essentially children. I'm talking about people who are well into their 20s, 30s, 40s, and then the Marxist professors at the big universities. It is extremely childish to be, and the BBC, and everyone who we feel should know better, who should have grown up, to be just joining this bandwagon. Yeah. And it's extremely depressing, actually.
It is. Well, I mean, you just said a few things there, and I wrote them down. We are, I'm afraid, one big echo chamber out of the two of us, because we're clearly very much of a like mind. But things that you touched on there, which words that jumped out at me. You said you talked about year zero, and I've written down here Mao and Pol Pot. And Pol Pot, by the way, as I understand it, was educated in postmodernism. I think that was basically his environment, and he went back to Cambodia to put it into practice. That worked out well. And then that's my understanding. And then I think you also mentioned about people being, young people in particular, or sort of people, sort of millennials, I suppose, unfair to throw them all into the same category, but and about their sort of, I mean, I do think victimhood seems to have become the thing. It's de rigueur. You've got, victimhood. You get loads of bonus points for being being a victim. Whereas it used to be that being stoic was the thing that people admired.
Yes.
And I think also, and I wrote this down here, no house. Now, I wonder whether some of this is, no doubt you can make any society unstable and unfocused if they don't have something to strive towards. And I think certainly in the UK, I think ridiculously so, but people over the last century have been driven by buying a house, building their little asset base, which I've got. I mean, I'm certainly a capitalist, so I've got no problem with that. But I think that the fact that that's been taken away from an entire generation, or much of an entire generation, probably has something to do with why their head has been turned, or their focus has been taken off what would otherwise have been known as the rat race. And with an idea that victimhood is now, to look at your navel and feel sorry for yourself is now expected almost. I do wonder whether that's not a rich ground for allowing people to explore other things, in the same way that you and I, in our 50s and 60s, are looking at things anew and thinking, oh my God, where's this all going? I wonder whether younger people have no longer they've no longer even believed that they've got a chance of getting on the housing ladder. They've probably been in education till their mid-20s. They've got a huge debt, which they may or may not have to pay off if they ever get above whatever it is, £28,000 a year. And I don't blame them for thinking, well, what's in it for me? And then, as you say, the loss of, I've never been a religious person, but I do think, I've watched a lot of Jordan Peterson over the last few years, as much of the world, and I do wonder whether he hit the nail on the head for me, in that he talks about archetypes, and he talks about all these stories of that are true, these sort of Platonic parables, if you like, and they're true no matter what part of the last 1,000 years you've lived in. And I think if you lose that, and a large part of religion was doing that, religion was serving those up to you until 50 or 60 years ago. And I think if an entire people lose religion, and they also lose lots of other stuff, which was until yesterday the way it was done, then that demoralizes and distracts and destroys an entire society, or even civilization, I think. I mean, there's so much coming together at once. It's like the perfect storm, really.
Yes, it is. It's a good point about alienated or not disenfranchised, but the young. And well, I've got two sons who are in their 20s, and they are great lads, and they are talented performers, musicians, actors. Their world is, well, first of all, their world is kind of, or their future has been thrown into big doubt, because both of them rely on performance.
Yeah.
And there ain't any of that going on, and one can't imagine that opening up very soon or properly ever again. And so that's sort of just an aside, really. But as I get a bit fed up with being sort of treated as the appalling boomer generation. I mean, I always regard the boomers as the older ones, the ones who are hippies, because I was too young to be a hippie. But it was the hippie generation that kind of helped accelerate progressivism as we came out of the 50s and into the 60s, that generation. But of course, they all did extremely, a lot of them did, again, it was a very middle class affair, and they all did extremely well, all went to good universities, became lawyers, well-paid lawyers. I don't know whether they're still sort of, they're probably returning to those roots now just to survive in the world, being progressive. But the fact that we've allowed this country to become a place where even if you're in a good job, you will not be able to afford your own property, I think is disgraceful. And I generally support free markets. There's a whole load of stuff to unpack about the free markets and corporations and the way capitalism works and so on, because we know there's a lot to dislike now. And I think it's largely because when I was learning economics, we learnt a lot about how monopolies were kind of illegal, or that there was a lot done to ensure that monopoly power was curtailed. We don't seem to do that anymore. But back to house prices, and I'm in the property world too, although I'm not in residential development. I'm broad commercial development and asset management and so on. The dynamics of that are complex. I mean, we know we've got very cheap mortgages now. When I first owned a house, I think mortgage rates were about 16%.
Yeah, late 80s was that probably?
Yeah. I got my first property at the early 80s, and I got a shared equity, helped me get on the property ladder, and then I bought out the rest of the property. It's a one-bedroom house, and then gradually moved on from there. And I think that should be available to everyone. And a home-owning democracy, which was one of the Thatcher ideas, was fantastic, and I think it's absolutely appropriate. And what do we do about that? Well, I've got some ideas. We know it's a difficult thing because everyone who's anyone in politics or research and so on thinks about these things. But we know that the storm of we always talk about the supply side, and that is a big deal. But we never talk about the demand side. And if you increase your population by several million in the space of a few years, as we did, that's going to have an impact, not just, of course, on housing, but on demand for all services. So it's a huge subject. But I'm not sure that the alienation around owning a house is a central factor. I think personally, I think it might be a factor, because I think generally alienation and then sort of latching onto a cause might to some extent, and it particularly was, for example, in the 60s over something like the Vietnam War, it was very much youngish people fighting against that idea of war, against the establishment and if you like, the middle classes and the adults. Whereas today, this year zero cancellation, call it whatever you want, is actively promoted by people who are wealthy and doing well, thanks very much, and who are what you call the intelligentsia, our media class, our university professorial class, all of that class of people are in the same alienation boat, and so I can't see it as just the young saying, we want, what do we want? We want a house. When do we want it? Now. I'm not sure they think about their living that way today so much either. They're quite nomadic. They're quite happy to rent. I don't like it at all.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't so much saying that I thought that was the reason, but I think that perhaps that allowed for people to take their eye off what would otherwise be a route through life.
Yes, no, and I wasn't suggesting you were arguing that, Mark. I was just I know that though it is a big deal, and I know that people, just talk to my own sons about it. It's a big deal, and it is a cause of alienation or disappointment with the system, with society, with politics.
Yes, I mean, I again on property, I also come from a property background. My first career was in commercial property and commercial property development, and a bit of mixed use as well. And I look back at the early 2000s, 2004 to 2006, and I was developing large warehouses, sort of 100 to 1 million square foot warehouses, and so big schemes, and they were all funded by big pension funds, and everyone was aware of this, but we were bidding on sites and in towns that would never have been considered for a 300,000 or 400,000 square foot warehouse in the past, and we were bidding on sites at record rents, record yields, which obviously makes very low yields, very big multipliers, which makes for huge land values. And we were buying land on the back of building a 400,000 or 500,000 square foot warehouse, knowing full well that we would probably never let it because we could pre-sell it to the fund, and we would just buy it, build it, and sell it empty. And the pension funds of everybody in this country were buying them. Now, maybe as a long-term plan it was good, I don't know. I mean, surely now you look at Amazon and people like that and you think, well, yeah, perhaps they were just ahead of their time. But it seemed like madness at the time to me. But the same with I'm not. I've done a little bit of small-scale housing on my own, but and my father was a house builder. But it's always seemed clear to me I studied estate management at college, and yes, demand, certainly the cost of money is the primary driver of house prices, I would suggest. And now that money is at an all-time low, it's all to do with loans to value. And then when you get to where we are now, where the average house price is 6 or 7 or 8 times average earnings, I don't know, it's a ridiculous figure.
Huge, yeah.
It makes no sense. And if you import 300,000 to 600,000 people every year, well, where are they going to live? So you've got demand through physical demand of people needing to live somewhere. You've got low cost of borrowing, meaning that people have got nowhere to put their money to make any money, so they're putting their money into housing, which of course the government tried to stop with the buy-to-let tax changes. And you've also got, they're talking, I think I saw again the other day, somebody was reintroducing Gordon Brown's brilliant idea of 100-year mortgages, which that's only going to drive up prices. That'll only drive up house prices more. People will spend what they can afford, and if they can afford more because they're borrowing over 3 times the period, they'll spend more, and it'll push up house prices, which pulls up land value. And you know all of this, but everyone seems to know everyone in politics seems to know everything about property, and everything. Everybody in the general society seems to know how to run a pub. Or a restaurant. It seems to be the 2 things that everybody could do without any expertise. But I don't know whether you agree with it. I think both of us coming from a property background, we've probably seen all of this sort of stuff, but it is a massive issue. I think though that in terms of culture wars and the way, I mean, I don't think it's going to matter what property's doing if we carry on the way we are. And I don't know what property is going to do in the commercial sector now that we've all been locked up for over 12 months, or just about 12 months.
No.
Perhaps we should just move on from that to the current lockdown. I mean, lots of people have said lots about it, so I don't suppose there's much we can add unless you've got a new take on it. But I mean,
no, other than to say, like so many people. People I interact with on Twitter, but not so many people around me who seem to sort of just accept it. I know I've said this before, and I apologise to anyone who's heard me say this on Twitter or on any other thing. A couple of other things I've done online, but I went to the first lockdown protest in Hyde Park.
Right, well done.
On the 17th of May. Well, it's more to say that I remember James Delingpole DM'd me and said, "I'm going down there today, and are you going?" And I said, "Well, I had thought about it, and I thought, right, yeah, well, I am going," because I was horrified. I mean, I was all for the initial lockdown. Not all for it. I was absolutely against it. But I kind of accepted that, if there was going to be a crush in A&E, and they're having to make life and death decisions on people because they're so overcrowded, then fine. But I read the Ferguson report. I did all that when it first came out on the day. I think I was reading that, and that sort of weekend. And then within a few days, I'd heard it trashed by some really good scientists and model creators. And we all suddenly realised that this guy wasn't all he was cracked up to be. Mm-hmm. Everyone else carried on believing, including the government. So I was... by the third week, I think it was, when we were meant to be opening up, I was horrified, and I already knew then it was going to be a multi-generational impact, because they'd managed in short space of time. God, I mean, this is why I say there's not much more to say on it, but it is feeling that it's a year on and it's worse, because we've totally ingrained the horror and the fear, and it's going to be so difficult to break people out of this, and not even the government can convince itself that it should move out of it. And we know there's all sorts of malign people ascribe all sorts of malign intent to it, and I think there is an element of it, but I can't see us breaking out of this and getting back to normal. And there was never any need to lock down at all. And I'm really strong on that. I'm not denying that lots of people died. We might have had a few more die, but it was never acceptable to destroy our society and people's health and jobs and businesses and many of those businesses forever, and many of those jobs forever, with no sight of anything that's going to seriously replace it. The green jobs is a fantasy. It's ludicrous. Yeah. But we're in a bad way by it.
I was thinking of the
really
car,
exhausted.
just driving home. I popped to the shops this afternoon. The only place that I tend to go out, just because there's no reason for me to go out at the moment, is to Waitrose to pick up some shopping. So I shop about 4 times a week instead of doing a weekly shop, because it gets me out of the house. But I was driving back and I was thinking exactly the same. That I'm actually, my two primary emotions at the moment are either boredom, both generally and with this whole dystopian reality, and talking about the same things over and over again. So boredom and anger. And you can't be bored when you're angry, and I'm angry probably more than I am bored. So it's probably, I don't know whether it's good or bad for me, but...
they say Jordan Peterson will tell you that anger is very bad for you, and but I'm the same. I can't. The anger. There's the other feeling that I get, and that's the feeling of sickness in the pit of my stomach, and that never goes. That hardly ever goes away, and that's that sort of very anxious, concerned, kind of sick feeling. That sort of lingering. That's not a good thing. That's not to say that I don't function. I have to function very well every day in, day out, because I'm a director within a FTSE company. And nothing gets in the way of work. Nothing gets in the way of just sort of being around family when I'm the family and so on. But there's an underlying there's a cloud, dark clouds around. There's an underlying sort of feeling of sickness in the pit of my stomach, and I just notice it, and it's quite concerning, really. And the anger, as we all feel, I mean, it probably gets as exacerbated when we see stuff on Twitter and the BBC behaving in a certain way, or a serious discussion going on about men being curfewed after 6 p.m. It is enough to drive you to distraction.
It is. I mean, I was probably in. Well, I can remember it well, actually. In sort of March, when the lockdown was first. It became obvious it was going to happen. I could see it was going to happen. And the week before they were talking about it, I wasn't sure quite what to think. And they laid it on pretty thick. And of course, there was all the things coming out of China and Italy and everything else. And so I was, when Johnson originally said he was I don't think he actually said it, but it was put out there that herd immunity was going to be the way we were going to get through it, like we have every other disease ever in the history of the world, And then obviously everybody jumped up and down, primarily the press and a few of these experts, and all of a sudden, no, we're going to lock down. He bottled it, basically, didn't he? And then we locked down, and they said 3 weeks, and I have to admit that I thought at the time, 3 weeks, okay. It's a 3-week lead into illness. They are saying that the curve is starting to increase. I don't know if it was exponential, but it's starting to increase dramatically. Now is the time to protect the NHS, wasn't it? That was the big thing. I hate those words now. And so I thought, yep, fair enough. I can see the logic. And 3 weeks. I was thinking, well, 3 weeks is doable.
Flatten the sombrero.
Exactly, all those things. I could see some logic to it. It seemed unusual, but I could see some logic. So I thought, well, okay. And they were talking about 500,000 deaths. Well, they were talking percentages, but if you did the maths, it was 500,000 deaths. And
that's right.
And I remember thinking, bloody, because nobody said the big number, but everyone was talking about percentages. I said this to a friend of mine. I said, she said, well, is this serious? And I said, well, they're talking about 500,000 deaths. And she went, oh my God, where have they said that? I said, well, it's X percentage or whatever. And she said, well, nobody can do maths, I found. Anyway, so I thought, well, okay, perhaps this is the big thing. So after a week or so, then Brendan O'Neill and Peter Hitchens were the only two people I could see, really, that were jumping up and down saying, we're losing our freedoms. And I think I even replied to Brendan O'Neill, who I've got a great deal of time for.
Me too.
On Facebook. I'm not on Facebook anymore, but I was on Facebook at the time. And I replied to him and said, look, everything you say I generally agree with, but I think you might be over-raking the pudding here. It's 3 weeks. We're not going to lose freedoms over 3 weeks. How wrong was I? And within 2 weeks, it became clear when the propaganda was ramping up. And I thought, oh my God, I didn't realise. And so probably from mid-April, I was absolutely where you were from the beginning, that this is just outrageous. It's,
well, the thing that always reminds me is I tweeted on the 17th of April some data that actually Fraser Nelson it wasn't only him, but he wasn't the source, but he'd collected some data. Even then, I mean, 17th of April, I mean, we were only then 3 weeks into the lockdown, showing how many excess deaths were starting to appear from lack of treatment, because they cleared out the NHS, and the other statistic at that point was something like 43, 44% of NHS beds were empty by that stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So shocking, cleared out, and we know that also caused a problem then in the care homes. But yes, it was it. The way I looked at this was, well, first of all, just interestingly, when I first read the stuff coming from Ferguson about 500,000 dead if we do nothing, 250,000 if we actively socially distance and have various mitigation measures. The first thing my wife and I did was start working out what would happen if we both died. We didn't think for a minute, being the sort of age and generation we are, and lived through various other virus problems and so on. We didn't think for a minute that society be shut down to try and protect us all, but that we'd have to get on with herd immunity. We'd have to hope that we stood a reasonable chance of surviving, and but life had to carry on. But that if it was that bad, and it wasn't exactly Ebola, but if it was really actually that bad, then we might just need to think about making sure our plans are in place.
Yeah.
And I was willing to get on with life. There's nothing brave about that, really. I just think that's what a proper functioning adult and a proper functioning society and a proper functioning government should have been doing. And we should have mitigated, taken whatever measures reasonably to take care of the vulnerable. We already knew by then it was going to affect certain types of people, the elderly, and people with comorbidities. We knew exactly then, within 3 weeks, as we did, and of course it wasn't within 3 weeks of knowing the virus, it was a few months on, that we do now. And all this debate that we have about statistics on the infection rate and fatality rate and numbers and so on, I regard as entirely irrelevant. I really do. But the tyranny of unbelievable tyranny of China changing the WHO World Health Organization policy on lockdown, because up until China lockdown, it wasn't a response to the virus, as we know. And they then went about making sure that Western society started doing the same thing. And for me, I don't understand where all the adults went. I really don't. And common sense and all of the scientific theory and practice that had prevailed right up until that moment, and it all went out the window. Shocking.
Well, it makes you wonder. I mean, exactly that. I mean, and the same thing's happening now with all of the laws that are being brought in. I am so I cannot express how little I feel, or not feel. That's the wrong word. I feel a lot for them. That I respect. I have no respect for virtually all the members of Parliament. I know that individually they have very little in the way of power nowadays, because they are central office or the big unions or whoever it is basically selects them, and that it's only the people that have they came straight out of college with a PPE, straight out of university with a PPE, or straight out of the teachers union or whatever, and they come straight into a position where they're an advisor like Cameron or something, and then straight into a safe seat, and that's it. So they're career politicians, so they're a waste of time anyway. But even people that you would have expected to have stood up to this. I mean, one of the people I am most amazed at is Rees Mogg. I mean, given his supposed love for the British Constitution, or the Parliament, the mother of all parliaments, and all this sort of stuff, he's presided as leader of the House. He's presided over all of this and hasn't said a peep.
Yes, I know.
Stunning.
It is quite stunning. Yeah.
He tweeted the other day. It always boils down to tweets, so that's obviously how we come across each other. But he tweeted the other day, or his office, or somebody tweeted the other day, some waxing lyrical about the freedom of the common man and this, that, and the other. And I thought, are you just trolling at this point? Yeah. I mean, I find it incredible, but
yes, it's abusive, really. I mean, it's quite appalling. Yeah, he was the darling of Brexit, of course. I mean, lots of these, some of these people, Johnson, darling of Brexit. I mean, I was, I felt like I was 4 years of fighting for Brexit, and I went to watch Rees Mogg, as you mentioned him. At the Spectator Fraser Nelson did an interview with him. At the height of the Remain Parliament and the battle for Brexit. And they had to relocate it to the London Palladium because there was such a huge demand. And it was like the second coming of Christ, because the audience was packed out with Brexit supporters, keen to hear what he had to say. And he could do no wrong. And I used to follow him on Instagram, sort of quite quirky sort of things he used to put out there. But I've stopped following, and I just don't listen to him anymore. I don't, he's just. And Steve Baker was another one I saw interviewed by Brendan O'Neill live on a podcast live day up in London. The best part of that day was seeing Richard and James Delingpole, and Steve Baker was the hero, and this independent thinker, kind of seemingly operating slightly separate to the Conservative Party machine, and the government, May's government, which was wretched. But all of them now shown actually their true colours. And I used to scoff a bit at people who said say things like they're controlled opposition, but I think they're right about them.
I think it's pretty clear, isn't it? I mean, there's Baker, Rees Mogg. Who's the? Is it Budgeon? Andrew Budgeon? Is it Budgeon?
Brigden, is it?
I can't remember his name. But, Bridgen. That's it, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I saw Baker and he both voted for this bill that went through yesterday.
Shocking.
And so did my
MP as well.
It's absolutely outrageous. The only MP I've got any time, and there's probably some I don't know of, but is Charles Walker, who seems to be a thoroughly decent, independent.
Yeah, I like
guy.
him. I like him a lot. He's good. Speak his mind, and saying the right things. And some people might say, well, he's more of this controlled opposition, but he comes across as very authentic and passionate, and I don't think you could fake that. Steve Baker and Rees Mogg, it's all very systematic. They talk with forked tongue, and whereas I agree that guy's got.
Yeah, he I think when he saw that arrest, which has become pertinent again recently, of that woman who, I think she was a sort of a serial protester, but I mean, since when's that a big issue? She's still knocking on late middle-aged woman who's getting literally thrown into the back of a police wagon by about 8 policemen in the middle of the day.
Political policing. It is political policing, and of course it's another huge subject for us all. But
it is. And he looked totally outraged at that. I think it shocked him.
Yes.
Which it didn't shock me, because if you look at these things and you don't watch the BBC all the time, you see this stuff all the time. But clearly he was shocked by it, and I thought fair play for actually going in and asking a question, points of order or whatever it was that he did straight away. I thought that was really good. But no, I mean, looking at the this is the next big thing, I think. The fact that you mentioned about, are there people with ulterior motives at play, and everyone's got a theory. Anyone that's thinking about this has got a theory. And whether it's, at the one end of the scale, you've got people saying that the society was closed down so they could install all the 5G towers to turn all the lizard brains on, or whatever it is that they say. Right. I don't know. And then at the other end of the scale, you've got, I suppose, people saying, "Oh well, we've got to, we have to do it. Don't overreact. It's all for the greater good. We've got to keep people alive and all this sort of stuff." But I don't know if you know much about the Great Reset. You probably know something about the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum. Does that ring a lot of bells with you?
Well, how long have we got? Yes, I suppose. Yeah, I think. Yeah, there's some. There's where to start with this, I suppose. I suppose about probably a few years ago, when I used to hear people talk about the globalist set meeting at Davos and so on, conspiring to sort of have some sort of new world order. I used to scoff a bit at that, saying, it's just silly. They're just politicians from around the world meeting, and of course I don't actually think it's much different to that. And Klaus Schwab is just whenever they put a video out, they don't get many likes or many views, no. We've noticed. So I'm not sure. I mean, he's almost like a comedy character. I think the problem is that I know that some people, and I get lots of replies to tweets, when we touch upon this subject about what's going on and what's behind it all, send me detailed plans. For example, the other day, I got a very detailed plan from somebody about how, kind of from the beginning of time, there's this sort of plan to sort of, well, I didn't quite understand it, but effectively to control mankind in a very evil way. Now, I don't hold to that theory. I don't think that 5G is a plan to change our minds, but it doesn't matter about that. There's enough else going on that is bad, but I don't think necessarily. Some of it might be coordinated to some extent, but there's this idea of the cathedral, and it's a word given to or the name given to, if you like, the broad ideology that works without cooperation and coordination. It's kind of the way things are. And it might be because the Marxists took over all the institutions, including now the presidency of the USA and all of our our main issue, even the National Trust, but the police, and as we know, and it might be because we become, and I find myself doing it sometimes. I used to at work. I'm much more aware of it now. You suddenly say, "Well, can I say that now, or should I write that now? Because is it appropriate these days to think like that?" And that is the cathedral at work. It is the fact that this is so deeply ingrained. It's taught in school. The sort of left-wing progressive ideology is taught in schools that it's got its own momentum. We're all to a large extent sort of agents of it, because it's kind of what we're having it pumped out through the television screen, through Sky News and BBC, and now through our drama and entertainment programs. And so it kind of pervades everything. And so it doesn't need much by way of Prince Charles talking to Schwab, with an evil look in the eye, saying, "Right, let's do all this." There's lots of this kind of naturally goes on, and whether it's and this convergent interest idea, Extinction Rebellion, I'm sure are loving the lockdown, but not because. Well, it might be because they think they can keep themselves safe from the virus, but that's how they want society to be anyway. And we hear it from Green MPs. We know that Black Lives Matter are a Marxist organisation, and that they want to see society change. So all of these interests, which have a slightly different angle, are coalescing. So it doesn't need people to organise it. It's happening without them. So Klaus Schwab probably can't believe his luck. But there has also, no doubt, been for many decades, and it started, I think, soon after the Second World War is when it first started. James Delingpole's done a couple of really good podcasts on this, where the technocrats genuinely are looking for a way of controlling the world, controlling population, the way we function. So there are a group of people who are out to do that, but there are so many other interests who are who've got similar sorts of ways of working and objectives, that the sheer fact that they're all looking to do their thing in the same direction means that we're absolutely in harm's way right now, those of us who don't go along with it. Absolutely.
Well, I have fairly religiously followed James Delingpole for a few years now, and his
me too.
Both his podcasts, and I know what you're referring to is that American chap who's I've seen once or twice before.
Yes, that's the one.
And yes, this technocracy thing is all it's amazing, but yes, it's of the same sort of ilk as the cathedral, and it's all coming from the technocracy is a specific thing, but the cathedral, I get the impression that's a more general reference to what's happening on in the background. Does that make sense? Is that how you distill it?
Well, I think. Yeah, as I see it, the cathedral is sort of is the building in notional building in which all of these forces are functioning,
right,
by design, by accident, by just because they're forces for pushing society in a certain direction, and they're many faceted and so on. And it's just a useful, to my mind, means of describing all of that. And that there are a few of us, and it seems to be is a diminishing number of us, who sit firmly outside and against all of that. And that's because we're normal.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, you look at I always think it's ironic that probably only 3 or 4 years ago, the Davos meeting, the Bilderberg group and all that sort of stuff, when they met, it was on the news because the likes of Antifa and people like that were throwing rocks at the windows. And now you look at it, and they're on side with them. They're on, they're fighting the same corner.
They're just an idea, as Biden said. Patrick Wood was the guy that James Delingpole interviewed.
That's right.
Yeah, he's very good.
No, he's very good. Very alluring to listen to as well. He's got a good way of speaking. But it was an interesting, and he's been doing it for so long. And a lot of the specifics he had to say about. I don't want to get it mixed up, but I think it was Rothschild. But it was somebody like Rothschild that was behind the first Davos meeting, and before that, the first sort of private meeting to set up the World Economic Forum, or to set up something that led to the World Economic Forum. I may be getting the two mixed up, but you look at Klaus Schwab, and he's the ultimate Bond villain, isn't he? When you look at his physically,
he's hilarious. It gives one some hope, really, that this thing will die a death as soon as. If most people probably don't think about him, probably haven't heard of him before. But if ever you talk to normal people in the street and said, "Do you think this guy might be planning to take over the world with a group of technocratic elites?" They just scoff at the idea. But the trouble is that those same people are probably wearing a mask and being, sort of very obedient servants to this rather nasty authoritarian government we've got now. And I mean, not just here, but across Western society.
Well, it is. This is the other thing. It's difficult if you consider your what people think of you, or the people that you love and respect think of you. It's very difficult sometimes to have these conversations because, I think you mentioned this to me before we spoke. I mean, I certainly am finding, and this is partially down to the lockdown, I suppose, because a lot of my friends live away anyway. They're not local to me, but I haven't really spoken to very many of my friends over the last few months, because when I became aware of actually what was happening, and I wasn't working because I can't work at the moment doing what I do now, and so I'm sort of, and some of them are still working, some of them are able to, so that they're still, their lives haven't changed a great deal, and right. So I'm ranting and raving and sending them videos of I don't know, probably World Economic Forum or something, and I think some of them I've just bored half to death, and their family, they've got families and everything else. Some of them probably think I've got a bit nuts, and some of them just totally disagree with me because it's all working out well for them. But the thing I've noticed is that in almost every instance, those of my friends that are genuinely concerned, and I don't know if this just happens to be me, none of them, with one exception, none of them have got children, which I find bizarre. The people that don't care, or don't seem to care, have all got families. Now, that might be because they're all busy, because obviously I don't have children, so when I do know enough to know that when you've got kids, they tend to sort of take over your every waking minute when you're not at work. So I get that. But I would have thought if you had children, I mean, I've not really got any skin in the game other than my own. But you would think if you had children, you would be, I mean, I actually genuinely am pleased, relieved almost, that I don't have kids now, because I'd be pulling what's left of my hair out if I did. I mean, but so I've lost, well, I don't know if I've lost them, but I've certainly I'm distanced from quite a few of my close friends. Whether it'll come back or not, I don't know, but I almost have lost a certain element of almost respect for them, because I just think, how can you just ignore this? It seems so bad.
Yes, I think that. Yeah, I know. Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
And I know I'm not alone, because I've spoken to other people. I've seen other people on podcasts and things talking about it, and there's a lot of people who've done the same. And sadly as well, some people with members of their family, which is even worse. I mean, that's terrible. But and this whole mask thing as well, and everything seems to be dividing us. You've got, if it's not race, it's generation, and if it's not generation, it's sexuality. If it's not sexuality, then it's something else, wealth or whatever. So there's, and you look at all of that, and you look at the fact that all of our not only the way that people react, but our actual laws are now changing. It's now illegal to protest. I mean, I cannot believe this. If you are going to do something as a single solitary person standing in the street, and you want to protest with a board, and that is considered to be an annoyance to somebody else, then you can't protest. So we don't have a right to protest anymore. We virtually don't have a right to speech because of hate speeches that are being brought in as we speak. Our organisations, institutions have now have the legal right to commit crimes in pursuit of their responsibilities, whether they're MI5. I read this afternoon when I was preparing for this. The Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Bill, which came into force last year, allows for members of the Secret Service, MI5, MI6, the police, so I'm guessing, sort of special branch and what have you, and the army, all to commit serious crime whilst undercover. That seems to be the general gist of it. And you might be able to say, well, if you're MI5 and you're in a terror cell, we've all seen it on the TV at some point. Perhaps you get in a situation where you have to do a bank robbery, for example, because otherwise you're going to be found out. So I kind of get that. It's not a pretty world. But what I didn't realise was 10 other organisations have the same power. 10 other organisations in the UK, including the Food Standards Agency, the Environment Agency, and 8 others that I couldn't find.
Yeah.
How on earth does the Food Standards Agency and the Environment Agency inherit the right to commit crimes in the pursuance of its duties?
Well, Mark, I didn't know that. I'd heard the headlines about, which tended to centre around, I think, the police.
I picked it up bizarrely. I picked it up in a Farmers Weekly journal, because the Farmers Weekly are talking about the Environment Agency and the Food Standards Agency, so they reported on it. But I find that stunning. So we've got that.
Yeah.
We've got.
I wrote to my MP about this, by the way, and that was even without knowing all of that detail. Well, say that I was expecting her to vote against it.
Well, it's my understanding is it's gone through. I wouldn't pretend to be an expert. I literally looked at it this afternoon, but that's how I picked it up. I think it was the Farmers Weekly I picked it up from. But so we've pretty much lost our freedom of movement. Well, we've lost our freedom of movement, at least temporarily, and probably forever, because they're bringing in these passports or whatever they're called. There was, I noticed, have you seen, I did share it on Twitter the other day, but did you see that they're consulting, they've just stopped consulting as of Friday on I think they're actually getting quotes now for contractors to put in place what reads like a social credit score system in the UK.
Yes. Yeah, I hear all these rumours about this. It's like the vaccine passports that they were telling us they'd never do, but they were busily procuring contractors to do these things. Yes, I saw some headlines on it. Do you know, I get to the point sometimes where I need to stop looking at this stuff.
Yeah.
And because I don't know whether I'm not normally somebody who stops looking at stuff because they want to just sort of bury their head in the sand. I mean, I couldn't have survived or done what I've done if I'd done that. But work in the workplace certainly. But I get to the point of some of this stuff where I'm thinking, I don't want to see any more of this stuff now. I want to see, because the horror it creates in my mind about where we're heading appalls me. But what appalls me even more is how not just our elected representatives, but society in general seems to be going along with all of this. Because the other bit of me, by the way, because my retirement was going to be hopefully doing nice things, traveling and a bit of music and photography and stuff like that. I think my retirement's going to be much more involved on the political front. Now, what I see in all of these things is a number of areas of policy where if somebody turned up today and said, my political party is for getting rid of all hate speech laws, undoing the Coronavirus Act completely, and that we'll agree never to lock down society again, not unless something like Ebola turned up and it was infecting everyone in the population. We would stop this nonsense about gender identity and the rest of it, and you can choose what you are by day of the week. I'd vote for them. And so it just feels to me like a lot of the stuff is fodder for a decent party to turn up and say, no, we're not going to take society down this authoritarian, actually pseudo-communist route. I mean, social credit scores it's a China. We know it's happening in China, and it is totally unacceptable for it to happen in our country, in my view.
Absolutely. I think it's petrifying. I mean, it really
It
is.
is petrifying.
I try, like you, I try sometimes not to think about it, because this is where I was coming to, really, was that we're talking about is there some big plan, or is there some conspiracy and all the rest of it? But you know, if you look at was it Cui Bono, who benefits, and then you look at what's actually being done, you think, well, what's changed in our society? The Overton window, we've already agreed, has changed dramatically to the left. Where the media, all of the media, has been infiltrated by far left people to a large extent. And even, I would say, I mean, I used to read The Spectator quite religiously. Sounds like you did as well.
Me too. Yeah. I still get it, but I never read it. It remains unopened. I mean, they've gone everywhere.
I mean, talk about controlled opposition. And then if you look at Andrew Neil, who I still believe he's an absolutely great, an excellent journalist in terms of technically, but his absolute refusal to even entertain there was anything dodgy going on with the US election. I just did it for me. I just thought,
I'm exactly the same as you.
And he was just, he would not look at it. He would not look at it.
No.
And you go, you know, I saw enough to see that there was stuff happening that needed to be looked into. I mean, for a start, how can a young woman, okay, she's in a parliament building, she's unarmed, but she is in a mob, and she's jumping through a window into, I think it was Congress or the Senate. I watched that live. I wish I hadn't. And she was shot in the head, shot dead.
I saw the video afterwards,
And I saw it again on somebody else's show the other day, and I managed to avoid it. But she was clearly in the wrong. And if that was Antifa, I would be think, well, what was she doing there? She shouldn't have been smashing windows and jumping through windows. But she's unarmed, and she shot dead at point blank range. No one has even investigated that.
No. What's really shocking is that there are armed police all around down the stairwell, because it was full of people. Of people. They weren't doing so. In other words, that the policemen there that weren't doing anything to stop her.
So I don't. Up the stairs.
That's right. It's a complete mystery. Now, there's no doubt that there were some Trump supporters there, but we also know that Antifa were coordinating groups of people taking part to make it look like an invasion. And it certainly looks it from a piece that I saw in it, quite a detailed piece from a security guru. But I don't care, really. I mean, I'm surprised that the Trump supporters didn't rip Washington apart because the establishment refused to even look. And there was a clear case to answer. And the most decent and proper thing to do in a democracy would have been to say, there's clearly some problems here, and some of these are the swing states. And we need to be able to demonstrate to everyone that this was a free and fair election. And they refused to do it. And consequently, there's a disenfranchised, probably majority in the US who have not seen a fair election. And then for as you say, Andrew Neil and then everyone else. I mean, if Andrew Neil's taken that position, then every other news broadcaster is mainstream broadcasters can take the same line. It was shocking, and this is part of the terror, really, for people like you and me and many others of our ilk. Is that it feels like I mean, I don't know that the Truman Show is the right reference here, but I mean there are lots of dystopian movies that we know, including Brazil, of course, which is your Twitter handle alludes to. which I watched for the first time, funnily enough, 2 or 3 weeks ago because of you. I'd always been aware of the film, never watched it. And it's very interesting.
No, it's a good film, actually.
It's a really good film. But it does feel like we're in... it does feel very much like we're in some sort of planned and organised dystopian world. And... we're outsiders who are alien to all of this, and I can't figure it out. I've never felt like this in my entire life, despite living through some very strange periods of my life. Like living, so I tweeted today, 30 years of my life were under threat of mutually assured destruction. We never knew quite whether there was going to be a nuclear war, and we had. And you'll remember, no doubt, that we had instructions as to what to do if there's a nuclear war. Actually, my first job was working for the London Borough of Hillingdon, believe it or not. It was, for my sins, a bit of time in the public sector. It's brilliant. I got qualified there. But we had... I was a member of a team, very young then, but I was just tagging along, probably at a sort of made sure they had a range of... the Civic Centre had a nuclear bunker, and it would have been one of the administration centres, and we had 1 or 2 drills at a weekend, I remember. So that was all going on, but I never felt as threatened then as I do today.
Well, I
never. I don't feel threatened by nuclear devastation, but I think sometimes nuclear devastation would be... No, I shouldn't say this, is a too glib a thing to say. The idea of moving into a social credit, universal basic income, you can't say or do anything. Your freedoms are effectively taken away from you, is terrifying. And it felt like most of my dad's generation was all about liberty and freedom and fighting tyranny, and it feels like we're sliding extremely quickly into that form of society, and that's what terrifies me, and probably sort of what's as terrifying us both. And I've never felt this way about the way of things as I do now, and that's why I'm quite politically motivated now. It's why I spend time on Twitter, and I know I can't influence things particularly on Twitter, but it's quite good that we all keep each other buoyed up. I think that's quite an important part of what we do on Twitter, and that if political movements do arise, that we start working out which ones are going to really speak for us, and then work out how we can make them obtain some form of success so there can be some influence over this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people are feeling that way. They're in a similar mindset to us. But I mean, I'm new to Twitter. I resisted it for many, many years. I only joined it towards when was it? Well, during the lockdown, largely because I haven't watched TV for a long time, and
not me.
And I just thought, you've got. I think I was looking for some sort of reaction to what was going on, and I found it. Well, I know I did. I joined, funnily enough, purely to watch Peter Hitchens, see what Peter Hitchens was saying.
Okay, yeah.
And then from that, I went into other things, and other people and all the rest of it. So I've only been there a little while, and I think I've got about 260 followers or something. But I mean, I'm not really there for the followers. I'm more about following other people and see what they've got to say. I say things, but of course there's a limited amount of response. Although I did send out I sent out a survey yesterday or the day before yesterday, saying was the lockdown worth it? And the 3 answers were yes, no. If you had to lose everything you have for the lockdown in order to protect everybody, would it be worth it? And it was certainly yes, definitely no, or I don't care, I'm all right, Jack.
Yes, I saw that, and I entered that poll as well.
Right, well, there was 90, I think it was about 98.9% was no, definitely not. And then about, I think, 0.7% was I'm all right, Jack, which it could just as easily have been somebody just, trolling or whatever. And about the same, about 0.7% or something, for yes, I would definitely. And I thought, I don't believe you. I don't believe you'd lose everything you have. I think it's just a solitary virtue signal by somebody.
Yeah.
And I think once the furlough stops and the economic reality hits, there's going to be a lot of people that never believed in the lockdown in the first place. All of a sudden.
I think you're right. As we've talked about in the past in other forums and so on, this I want nothing else than to be rid of this government and the main antagonists here. I regard a lot of what they've done as criminal.
Yeah.
And it's no good, the worst crimes are done behind the facade of caring for people or for people's safety. They've terrorized us with a propaganda campaign, and they've changed people's behaviors and thinking, and for the worst. And it is unforgivable. And so I will, I apologise if I sound like I'm ranting a bit or going on, but there's no way that I'll ever vote Conservative again. I voted for Boris and co, and I even turned up on one of his big campaign dues. It was a few meters away from him, filming him. I was on the stage at the end of it, and all very, very enthusiastic about him taking over from May and then winning and getting us out of the EU, not realising, of course, what a monster he is, and he is a monster.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. I suppose to some extent his personal life should have given some ideas, yes. but then some great men. And you don't have to be good to be great or great to be good, but some great men like the likes of Nelson, for example. I read his. I'm quite a keen sailor, and I read his one of the better biographies of him. And right. I don't think many people, apart from obviously nowadays with the current state of affairs, would deny that he was a great man that had a massive impact on world affairs.
Absolutely.
But he was a pretty vain, selfish, unpleasant character who abandoned his wife and children and shacked up with somebody else's wife in a menage a trois in Naples. And
right.
He was incredibly vain and incredibly selfish and not a particularly pleasant guy by the look of it. But I don't think you have to be necessarily, a nice or good guy. But I think where Johnson is, so I think he's vacuous. Somebody that knows him well, can't remember who it was. It wasn't Dellingpole, but somebody like that said, he's the only thing that matters to Boris Johnson is Boris Johnson. So I don't think he's got a greater sort of loyalty or anything.
No.
He clearly doesn't have any moral compass. I mean, I don't know how many wives he's abandoned and children he's abandoned, apparently, allegedly. So.
Yeah, and now doesn't appear to have any political principles either.
No. And I feel exactly the same. I mean, there's only so much you can say in public, but I mean, I have I have no sympathy for the man or his cohort, his regime, at all.
No, I mean, Priti Patel too. I mean, extraordinary, really. I was really pleased. I used to quite like what I saw from her, and I was quite pleased she was made Home Secretary, but not anymore. No. I regard her as a deeply authoritarian and deeply worrying character, because I don't think she has Well, I think it's true of all of them that they have the strength of character and leadership to be in charge of the country, and her instincts are particularly malign, I think. I mean, I don't know whether it's John. I think Johnson takes. I mean, before we started getting worried about the government and about that response to the virus and so on, we were observing, and I don't know about you, but I certainly was observing daily almost on Twitter the thuggery from the French police on the Gilets jaunes over a period of about a year, week in, week out. And their policing is pretty brutal. And I've seen not actually a battle, but I've seen them at play in Paris, the French riot police, and the way they look, the way they behave, the way that their formations and all this kind of thing. I saw a thing when there was a demonstration going on there back in the 80s when I was over there traveling on my own. I got some pictures from it, actually. It's quite interesting. And but they've definitely got a different thing going on over there. But I look across Europe as well. We see scenes from Amsterdam, and we see scenes from Berlin of water cannon and quite brutal policing, unnecessarily brutal. Mm-hmm. And I fear that we're heading down the same route. You know, we want this thoroughly modern, progressive, postmodern police force, and that is what we used to see on the streets of Paris and elsewhere around France, smashing up Gilets jaunes demonstrations. And I fear, you know, if there's a demonstration on Saturday, and we've seen it before on the lockdown protests, that's the way the police are behaving. And it's aimed particularly at those people who are on our side of the fence, who are just arguing for democracy and freedom and some common sense and a chance to question the orthodoxy. Whereas if you're a member of the BLM or Extinction Rebellion or so on, the police will dance with you or kneel to you, depending on what your cause is. Yep. And that is deeply wrong in a democracy, that's what we've got with our police.
The fact that it's now punishable by up to 10 years in prison to go on a protest or to attack a statue. I mean, I'm all for not attacking statues, but 10 years in prison. 10 years in prison for coming back from Portugal. I mean, the fact that they throw these things out. Lord Sumption, I mean, had a really good go at this idiot health secretary about making a 10-year imprisonable offence. That's it, coming back from Portugal,
for lying on it, lying that you've been to Portugal. Yeah, but ridiculous.
The idea, just the very idea that
it's tyrannical.
Yeah, that supposedly serious politicians are saying, right, as of tomorrow, if you protest on the street, we don't like it, 10 years in clink. And then they turn around and say, well, of course we're not going to do that. But why did you put it into law then? I don't believe you. You know, there's lots of stuff you put in law that you now do that you said you wouldn't.
They're not going to stop me saying the truth. And as Solzhenitsyn wrote, and I've got it in my little bio in my Twitter account, live not by lies. Because if you start lying, if you start lying, you are only feeding that tyranny. And you have to be willing to sacrifice to stand for the truth. Well, I don't think we should go around being bigoted, or we certainly shouldn't be. There's no room for attacking, being aggressive towards people who, whatever class of person it is, not acceptable. But they cannot control our speech, and that's. There's lots been said about the Soviet Union, and just recently I've been reading about it, or listening to people talking about it. That what was going on in the Soviet, it might have been Nigel Farage actually, on the trigonometry podcast, but people knew that they were living a lie. They knew, and of course, as soon as the Berlin Wall fell and Glasnost took over, it was like released from the lie that they'd been living, and that it's unacceptable, totally unacceptable. And Solzhenitsyn is, I've read him a bit. I don't know, I'm not a scholar on Solzhenitsyn at all, but I think that's not a bad principle to live your life by. To stand, and that's the point for me, is to work out what your principles are, and then stand by them. And and when we get this form of legislation, it's our duty to breach it and to fight to remove it from the statute book and to remove the government that introduced it.
Yeah. I mean, that's largely, I think, what Lord Sumption said the other day, although I wouldn't want to put words in his mouth. He was much more careful about what he said.
Was saying that. I think he was sort of saying, I'm surprised that people aren't, or I wouldn't be surprised if, or people, in fact, he went a bit further, I think, actually. I think you might be right. Originally, I think a few weeks ago, he was saying, I wouldn't be surprised if people started to breach, and this is talking about lockdowns and so on, and the law, the Coronavirus Act, but he was going a bit further this time, saying that people should be challenging immoral laws.
Yes.
And I believe that too. And it's easy for me to say that. I can understand why most people it's an impossible thing. And actually, right now, it's probably impossible for me, because I'd lose, or, you run the risk of losing your job. But if in retirement, it might be easier. Maybe that's where I'll spend my retirement. It might be in Wandsworth Prison.
Well, I without any, I wasn't joking at all. I tweeted a couple of nights ago. I tweeted, I think there's a 3-to-1 chance that I'm going to end up in prison in the next 2 years, and that's not because I intend to go out and do anything silly. It's because I think I'm not going to be able to avoid it and do what you're saying, which is to not live a lie.
I think we've all got to be careful about where we pick our battles. Otherwise, we just end up not being effective.
Yes.
I think it's really important just to say, well, I'm going to every tweet I do is going to be a breach of this new hate speech law. I think that would be silly, but I think there is a means of, don't know what it might be, and be different things for different people, but that we need to, and it might even be just discussing it like we are with other people, and sometimes publicly, sometimes privately, saying what you believe and trying to, reassuring somebody else who holds the same principles, or persuading them to change their view or to wake up to what's going on. And I think we do have a duty to do that, those of us who care. I mean, I would say, and that's sort of what I feel I'm now engaged in. I never intended my life to be like this, but it feels like we're a number of us who are observing all this and so worried about where we're heading that we feel we've got no choice but to get involved.
Well, it's the idea that we're both speaking, having never met each other before, and finding so much in common says something in itself. And I know we're not alone in the people that we speak to on the Twitter platform, the few that are still allowed there. But the Solzhenitsyn thing. Did you read the Gulag Archipelago? Have you read that?
Yes,
quite a tome. But,
it is. It's really hard work. I mean, it's terrifying because it's kind of. I recall from the first volume, it was like a catalogue of terrible things happening to different people, and the various committees and authorities taking action to get rid of people or send them off to the Gulag. It's grim, but I think part of the thing bothers me is that, for example, in my team at work, I've got chaps who are early 30s, and it's now 32. What is it? Is it 32 years since the Berlin Wall came down?
Came down in 89.
Yeah. So we've got people who are in early adulthood, well, not early adulthood, actually approaching middle age, you might say, who weren't living under the threat of or observing the Soviet Union and the threat of it. What's laughable is the government still sort of direct their sort of ire and their concern and their defence capability at Russia, which is lunacy.
It is.
But yeah, for those, I think it's this idea of it's the conceit, and it does speak to the freedoms we've had and the comfort that we've had and the material blessings that we've got, that we can play politics with our freedom in this way. And we're heading down the same road that we thought we were escaping from. People laugh it off, think, well, it's Boris, you're just mad, you're just conspiracy. But look at what they're enacting and look at where policy's going. You don't need any conspiracy theories beyond what's actually happening in front of you to know that things are going in a deeply worrying direction, and we should stand up and fight it at every turn.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've been going an hour and 50 minutes, believe it or not.
Oh, wow. And, sorry about that.
No, I'm not at all. I've enjoyed it. But I'm conscious that people may sort of bail out at various times through it.
A long time ago. But, look, if nothing else, great to talk to you, Mark.
Absolutely.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks
to you too. I've got so much more I'd like to talk to you about. Perhaps another time, perhaps in a month or 2 months' time, maybe.
Love to.
When things have moved on again, we can have another chat. Thanks very much again. So that's David, otherwise known as 02HERO on Twitter. He has quite a few interesting followers and follows some very interesting people. So I definitely recommend you listening to his words of wisdom. And David, thank you very much for joining us. The second ever episode of Vox Pop. And
it's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, me too. And I hope to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. All the best.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye now.